Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Live at Epiphan. I'm George.
And I'm Dan.
And today we have a pretty interesting show. Dan's got a whole bunch of little tricks he's going to share with you guys. So what are those tricks today?
Yeah, so we actually have 7 basic camera tips that are relevant for you people out there who want to make your live stream look a little bit better. So if you want to get some quick, easy tips that you can start using right away, stay tuned for the rest of the episode.
Perfect. Of course, if you have any questions, throw them into chat, comments on Facebook or YouTube, whichever one you happen to be viewing right now, and we'd be happy to answer those questions later on in the show. Right off the top, this is a little bit of a unique show, so we set up things quite differently in our studio. First thing you'll probably notice is no chroma keying, just flat green wall, which is not quite as interesting, but for today's purposes, that's actually going to be important.
Yeah, I mean, this episode is going to be a little bit of like a behind the scenes, and you're going to get a chance to see our studio setup a little bit, and when we demonstrate some of these camera tips, you're going to get to sort of look behind the curtain and see how we do things here, so that might be cool.
So the no chroma keying, we've changed up our audio mix a little bit and how we're running some of the audio. Again, today's a little bit unique where Dan's wearing a lav mic. Normally we just use an overhead microphone to pick up everything that's happening. So we've routed things a little differently. I won't go too deep into that. And then I guess one thing you'll definitely notice, which is unique for today, is we've thrown a GoPro into the mix as a third camera. So that, well, we'll see what that looks like.
Yeah, you know what? Why don't we just switch to the GoPro feed for just a second, and we'll give you a look behind. Oh, and there it is. It's kind of moved a little bit, so we'll have to deal with that. So, hey, wave, say hello to everybody. Okay, we can pop back to the main camera.
Yeah.
And and yes, so we're going to start by demonstrating some tips right away. So why don't we jump into the first tip, which is the rule of thirds. Now, George, do you know anything about what the rule of thirds is all about?
You know, I've heard that, but I have no idea what that means. Like, it's something I hear all the time. I'm not a photographer or a video guy, but it's something I hear from my photographer friends all the time. And I'm like, yeah, thirds, gotcha. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, so when we talk about rule of thirds, we're actually talking about composition of the frame. So when you actually point your camera and try to get your camera angle to look good and make that frame look nice and composed, it's a very basic general rule that you can use to help you to make sure your composition looks great. So why don't we go ahead and we'll actually start demonstrating. So I'm going to, in just a moment, move over to our B camera and give you a couple examples. So why don't we switch to the B camera right now, Yusufa? Now you'll see, you might be wondering why there are these lines across the screen. You can turn those back on if you want. So these are the guidelines for the rule of thirds. And basically what the rule of thirds is it's 9 equally sized parts of the frame. And what you want to try to do is put interesting focal points on those lines and on the places where those lines intersect. So why don't we go ahead, and I'm going to actually start doing some framing here with the rule of thirds. So we're going to use this sort of side angle here. Now, you know, the automatic tendency for a lot of people is to frame their subject right in the center of the frame, something like this, okay? Now, you might find that looks a little bit awkward.
I feel awkward.
Yes, and you know, you're kind of floating in the middle of the camera, and it, you know, there's nothing to sort of anchor you in the frame.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, I'm actually going to try to use what we have available here. So we've got this wall on the right side of the frame, and we've got the desk. So let's try to use some of the elements that we have here to compose a frame using the rule of thirds. So let's take a look. What I'm going to do, George, I'm actually going to put you right on the left line for the rule of thirds. Okay. So you see, I'm starting to use that line. That's looking okay. So, you know, this may be a nice, there we go. We've got you kind of on the rule of thirds there, but what I might want to do is try to use the desk and see if we can compose the shot a little more. So I'm going to rotate around here. How you feeling over there, George?
Still awkward.
Yeah. Well,
Just
you know
me
what?
Sitting here at a desk all by myself.
You know, you got a coffee, you know, enjoy yourself,
Papers.
right? Okay, so now I'm gonna maybe zoom this out just a bit, and we're gonna kind of get that desk on the lower line of the rule of thirds. Okay, and I'm gonna try to sort of put your face right on the top line intersecting. And there you get some idea. Okay, that's looking all right.
Okay.
And why don't we turn that overlay off again? And I'm going to come around here. So you see, with the rule of thirds, you know, we've got George here. He's right on the axis of, and we've got on this top line of the rule of thirds, we've got his head. So your eye is automatically drawn to those intersection points. Now, if we were going to add another subject to this frame, you know, you could add an element right here. So let's say if you wanted to have a second guest or a host, you know, you could put them on the other line. Or if you had another object or some framing element, this is where you'd want to put it, right on this line. So as you build your frame, just be conscious of the rule of thirds. There's a lot of ways you can use it. You know, rules are meant to be broken. You don't necessarily have to, why don't we go back to the main camera here. You don't necessarily have to follow the rule of thirds. It's a guideline. But if you want to try to make your composition look a little better, it's a good basic way to make sure that, you know, your frame is well composed. If you have a horizon line, put it on either the top or bottom of line that's going across horizontally.
So we went back to our main camera, which certainly seems less interesting than what you were playing with that sort of B camera. Are there particular reasons why our main front camera, other than physical space, why we choose this shot? I mean, I guess for two of us, we're kind of...
Yeah, well, you know what? This shot is actually, you know, pretty well composed as a rule of thirds. So you see this line of the desk right here? This is kind of close to where that lower horizontal line of the rule of thirds is. If you,
the two of
us,
okay.
we're right on the vertical lines, and actually our heads are located approximately at the top line of the rule of thirds. So this is actually a pretty decently composed frame using the rule of thirds. And when you're composing your frame in your shots, for all of you out there, just keep it in mind. You don't have to use it, but it's a good basic guideline.
Right. Well, I guess that top line for having people's heads helps with making sure that you're not cutting people off either.
Exactly. And you know what? The rule of thirds applies on, you know, we just demonstrated it with a wide shot, but when you get in on a close-up of someone's face, you can use the rule of thirds for that as well. Put their eyes on the top horizontal line.
Okay.
You know, you could put their chin on the lower one. There's a lot of ways to use it. It certainly applies. And many cameras actually have overlays built into the menus that can help to guide you, similar to what we just showed with our overlay. So check out your camera and see if it has that feature.
Okay, so that's a great tip. That seems like, if anything, the master rule. So what are some of the other pieces?
Okay, so the next rule that I want to give to all you live streamers out there is to mind the headroom. And what headroom is, it's actually the space between the top of your head and the where are we here? The top of the frame, right about there. So you see how much headroom we've got. We've actually got a pretty comfy amount of headroom here. You know, I wouldn't want to have any more than what we have right now. Why don't we actually demonstrate a few? Can we actually try our GoPro again, Yusufa?
Just in case. And see.
Yeah, there, that's much better. Geraldine, thank you for fixing that up for us. Okay, so let's come over here. And I am going to show a couple examples of headroom. So why don't we start with bad headroom, not enough headroom, okay? So if I went like this, okay, I'm going to focus this in. Okay, now you see that's clearly not enough headroom, right? We're cutting off the top of George's head. Conversely,
I prefer you didn't.
Yeah. You want to go to the picture-in-picture, see if I can kind of show? We're gonna change this a bit. We're gonna add a little more headroom and go something like this. Okay. Now how does that look? I don't know. What do you think, George?
It's an improvement. At least you're not chopping my head off, so that's good.
Yeah, certainly it is an improvement, but I think probably it it still has a little bit too much headroom. It feels like your head isn't anchored in the frame and you're kind of floating around in there. So let's reduce that a little bit. Let's cut the difference and go like about here. And notice I've got you on the rule of thirds on the left line as well. So that's looking pretty good right there, okay? Now, in certain instances, you can break the rule of thirds or the headroom rule. You can, in some cases, if you're doing a close-up, I'm going to do a close-up here, George.
Oh, okay.
Now, you see, nice haircut, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
I'm looking great.
I haven't shaved in years.
Okay, we'll get you focused. So here, on very close shots like this, you can actually get away with chopping off the very top of someone's head. And this is a common framing technique in films when you want to increase dramatic tension. This may not be for your everyday, live streaming vlog, but in cases where, you want to create that sort of dramatic impact and feel like you're right in the camera with the viewer, this can work. So, use it sparingly, but you can just chop the very top of the hair off in some cases on close-ups. But for the most part, if you're doing like vlog type content, you want to give just a nice comfy little gap right at the top. So Perfect. That is headroom. And I'll come back and join you here at the desk again. So what do you think? Easy tip, easy to apply?
So. Yeah, that one's probably, I think, pretty straightforward. That one's pretty logical too.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, you want to make sure things look right and they're not awkward, and so yeah, that one makes sense.
Let's go to the next tip. Okay, focal length. So focal length. What's your knowledge of focal length? When I say focal length, what does that mean to you, George?
Well, again, I'm no photographer, so but as far as I'm aware, there's different ways of adjusting that. Whether you're close up with basically no zoom, really wide shot, or whether you're trying to put the camera really far away and zoom in, it sort of changes the perspective of the shot.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what you're talking about?
And I think you're pretty much on the mark. So focal length it's quite simply how zoomed in are you is the way that most people would understand it. Right. Now, the difference between having the camera very close to your subject with a wide angle lens or having the camera further away from your subject and then zooming in, it actually really changes what someone looks like on camera. And there might be some ways that you can actually look a little bit better on camera based on the focal length you're using. So why don't we show that?
Sure.
Let's go over to the picture-in-picture again, Yusufa. Okay, I'll just wave hello to everyone from the GoPro. Hey up there. So let's start with a very wide focal length. So I'm going to get this camera right in here. Okay. Whoops, sorry about that.
All heads are flexible, but they can also make mistakes.
There we go. And actually, you know what I'll even do? I'm going to get it a bit closer. So I'm just going to take this off.
Yeah, that's a tricky tripod.
Let's just go like this. Okay, so you see here, we have a pretty wide angle and we're close to the subject, okay? This is what looks like when you're doing a selfie or something, right? What ends up happening is it kind of distorts the way that your face looks. It makes your nose look big and then the top of your head kind of shrinks in the camera. And that's just a natural function of the way that a camera lens actually works.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to do the same shot. So notice that at the bottom of the frame, I'm just cropping his top or his second button. Okay, but if I go ahead and back this all the way out, we're going to frame it very similarly. But the only difference is we're going to have the camera far back, and I'm going to zoom in instead. Okay. Now you're going to notice the difference here. Let me get the focus. Okay, focusing in. So we have the exact same shot in terms of framing. We're just cropping the second button of his shirt. We've got a nice little bit of headroom, not too much.
I feel like less of a cone head, so that's all right.
Yeah, but you notice like the shape of your face now is much more portrait-like rather than when we were up close with a wide angle.
And that wasn't a huge distance. I mean, you guys can see it on the GoPro. You had the camera right up at the edge of the desk on that previous shot. You've only gone about 4 feet back, really.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just getting the camera a little further away and then, you know, basically zooming in and creating what it ends up happening is it compresses the z-axis, the depth axis, and it makes your subject look a little bit more like they're being in a portrait. Yeah, more natural to the eye. Just to show the difference again, I'm going to move the camera in and zoom out. And now you'll see, do you see the difference there that made? I hope everyone can kind of tell, but the difference is significant. So if you want to look a little bit better on camera, the tip that we'll give is just get the camera further away and zoom in.
Now, is there a caveat to that, depending on the camera you're using? Because my general impression is that cameras that heavily use digital zoom can impact image quality. So is this something that you should only use within the limitation of an optical zoom?
You know what? That is a very good point. So I'll come back to the desk and join you here.
Sure.
Yeah, so George, that's a great point. If your camera has a digital zoom, when you're zooming in, it's not actually going to create the optical difference.
Right, because it's just sort of cropping in and then scaling it up.
So this tip is relevant if you have an optical zoom, and that is you have a lens that is capable of telephoto or wide angle, and you have a zoom ring.
Right.
If you're just doing a digital zoom like you do on a cell phone,
right.
It's really not going to make much of a difference in terms of like actually the shape of your subject.
Right. Okay. So in this case, I think this is the Canon AX10, if memory serves. It probably has something like an 8 to a 12 optical, and then something after that digital, like most camcorder styles do.
Exactly.
So we would want to, usually in the settings, from what I'm seeing, you can usually turn digital on and off on some of those.
Yep.
So you can just say, okay, I'm never going to use that because it's going to negatively impact my image.
Yeah. I mean, here's another like mini tip. Don't use digital zoom if you can avoid it, because all you're doing is cropping in, so you're losing resolution, right? So whenever you can, if you have a digital zoom feature on your camera, just turn it off. It's better to just do that crop after the fact, if that's the case and what you want to do.
Okay. So what's another really good tip well, I guess, yeah,
people can apply. Yeah, let's throw in another tip. Tip number 4 is level your camera. See this all the time.
That seems pretty obvious to me, but maybe I don't know. I guess.
So, you know, nothing ruins a shot quicker than if it's tilted a little bit or off axis, and it's really quite distracting. And you know what? Even if you're a little bit off axis, you may not realize it yourself. But someone else might, and it looks kind of awkward. So why don't we show a couple examples, and I'll show actually some tips on how you can ensure that your shot is level. Okay.
Sure. So while you do that, I'm just going to review some of the questions we have coming in and see if we can answer any of them really quick. One of them coming in, which is pretty good question actually, is what color of green background should someone use for a green screen, and is there a specific color code that's good for that?
Yeah.
Not quite related question. We can get to that at the end.
No, why don't we can take a crack at it right now. Right. So in terms of using a chroma key, your background, less important is the actual color. Okay, the reason green is used is because it's not a very common naturally occurring color. Right. So it's less likely that people are wearing, that color of green shirt. It's also less likely to find that color reflecting off lighted objects. Okay. So that's really why there is the green. You may have seen blue screen also used to be quite popular. Yep. But green works well because it's not a very common naturally occurring color in the color spectrum and in clothing and other elements that you wouldn't want to be keying out. In terms of actually lighting a green screen, there is a tip that I can give, and that's to set if you do have like a waveform monitor on your camera, you can measure the luminosity of the green. And what you want to try to do is have the green screen evenly lit. So you want to typically set the IRE, that's the luminosity of the green screen, right at about 60 to 65%, which is what we're using here in the studio. Another trick in order to, if you don't have a waveform monitor function in your camera, what you can do is actually turn on zebras in your camera. And often your camera will have a zebra setting where you can set the exposure level of the zebras, set the zebras to about 60%, and then what you can do is light your green screen and gradually you get the whole thing zebraed, and then gradually bring down your lights until the zebra just goes away. That will let you know that your green screen is right around the 60% IRE luminosity. And it will help you to just achieve a really good key.
Perfect.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, another one that wasn't so much a question, but something definitely worth noting that one of our YouTube viewers mentioned, that a lot of prosumer broadcast cameras, they have a safe title area built in, and that's sort of relevant to what we've been talking about. If your camera has options like that, that can make some of this stuff a little easier.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't want to if you're going to have text or graphics on screen, it's not typically a good idea to have them right at the edges of your frame, because different people viewing on different devices or monitors, they may actually have slightly cropped monitors, so they may lose those edges a little bit. So yeah, definitely title safe can come in handy. It's a good way to know, where you can set things up in your frame.
Perfect.
But yeah, let's get back to the tip we were working on, and that's leveling your camera.
So should I go get my 4-foot level and do that, or is that a little extreme in this case?
You know what? You don't even need that, George. What you can do is you just need to know about an object that is level. So let's go to our B camera. So okay, let's take a look at this shot right here. Right away, I'm going to zoom it out a bit.
Off. I don't know if you're aware, but
yeah, I mean, it's a little bit off. It's not perfect, right? And the easiest way to correct for that is to know about an object that is level. So we know that the desk is level, right? So what I'm going to do is, if we're straight onto the desk, what I can do to get my shot level is actually just use the bottom of the desk. So I'm going to line up the bottom of the desk to the bottom of my frame. You see I've got my camera, my tripod ball head mount, so I can very easily rotate in both directions.
You might be making some of our viewers seasick with that motion, so just bear with us.
Okay, so let's go ahead and we're just going to use the bottom of the frame to try to line up the desk, okay?
Now, is this something else where those grid lines for the lower thirds could help us? Because then we'd have a defined line.
Absolutely,
which
an
we're
overlay.
trying to get at that lower third.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead, actually, Yusufa, can you put on the overlay again? The rule of thirds overlay.
Perfect.
This can certainly help us to figure out how level we are in our frame.
Right.
Okay, so now if I use that line, and I'm going to actually use the top line of the desk here, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to try to get it as much on that line as I can.
Of course, you are on a slight angle, so it's choosing a point to level against. But
yeah, so let's say right about there's pretty good. Now I'm going to lock down my ball mount right about there. Okay. Now if I tilt up or down with the camera, it should remain level, right? As long as I have a tilt lock.
Right, that tripod doesn't. It's a straight ball head, so it's a bit more of a challenge.
It's a little more challenging, but basically all I'm doing is I'm using, in this case, the overlays to line it up with something that I know is level. You can also, if we don't have overlays, what you can do is actually just use the bottom of your frame or the top of your frame to achieve the same result. What I would caution, and I'll come back and join you at the desk, what I would caution is just to make sure that if you are going to use an object, make sure that you're shooting it straight on. Because if you're shooting it from an angle, obviously,
then you're skewed.
Everything's skewed and it's not going to work anyways. The other thing is a lot of tripods. If you are going to invest in a tripod, make sure that it has
Yeah, I've seen that. A number of them, either they have a single bubble level or some have two different levels for the different axes, which can help.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, absolutely. A level can help you. A lot of cameras also now have a horizon function in it, so you can turn on that
even
gimbal.
A cell phone can turn that on, and a lot of the manual modes on cell cameras now have that as well. You can figure out what that is.
Exactly. So take a look at what settings you have available in your camera. Maybe use your overlays to level your camera, or use an object in the frame to level your camera. Leveling your shot will make a big difference, and it'll just look a lot more professional when you are level.
Great. So that's, I mean, that one seems like a pretty obvious one, but I've seen examples where that hasn't been done, and so obviously it's a good rule of thumb to follow. So what's another thing that we can try and do? Well, actually, it happened earlier in the episode. Sometimes the nice part about doing this show is sometimes things don't go perfect. So right near the beginning, when we first switched to our GoPro, it had actually slipped out of position. So I think a good rule of thumb there is making sure things are rock solid and stable.
Yes.
So that's probably on your list of tips there.
Yeah, this is a really basic tip, but stabilizing your camera, make sure you have a good tripod. Try to, instead of, if you typically are using handheld shots, try using a tripod instead. And the reason that that's also important, and we've talked about this before, George, for live streaming, is when you are shooting handheld, every single pixel in your frame is moving.
Right.
And that puts more strain on your encoding, which means that it actually reduces the quality of the image.
So minimizing erratic movement is important, trying to make sure that there's not a lot of unnecessary movement, shaky cam, that sort of thing, leads to more compression artifacting in some cases. So certainly, yeah, stabilizing it. But what about using things like a monopod? I know that we have one that we usually take on the road with us. I don't think it's in the room at the moment, but I've seen some, kind of crappy monopods. I've seen some really, really nice ones as well. Is that a good alternative if you do have to do movement?
If you're going to be moving around, monopod's a great tool because it really does help you stabilize and get rid of that sort of shaky handheld cam look, but it still gives you the flexibility to move around as though you were handheld. So monopod's a great tool if you're doing more run and gun
or I
type
guess I've
shooting.
also seen X frames or whatever they call them, just where it adds weight so you get more of that pendulum effect.
Yeah, or you can use, if you have a DSLR, you can use a shoulder mount, right? You can get a shoulder mount. I think Cowboy Studio makes a $25 shoulder mount that works great for DSLRs. So just the main tip is just if you are shooting handheld, consider going with some kind of camera stabilization.
Well, I guess we even saw it at Infocom. The journalists working for Rave Publications were even using, in some cases, when they were doing quick little shoots, they even had cell phones mounted inside of a larger grip frame so that they could even stabilize these shaky devices. Which I thought was pretty cool. It was one of the first times I've seen that.
I always say, in terms of stabilizing a shot, you want to create more points of contact between yourself and the camera to do that. So, if you're usually holding the camera with one hand, that's one point of contact.
Yeah.
If you put the same camera in a grip cage with two handles on it, now you have 2 points of contact, which is a lot easier to keep it stable.
Add a shoulder, that becomes
a shoulder mount. Now you have 3 points of contact. So more points of contact is a great way to stabilize your shots. Using a monopod or a tripod is obviously going to be great as well.
Perfect.
Next tip, get your camera higher. You know what? I was looking at a bunch of live streams in preparation for this show, George, and I couldn't believe the number of shots that I was seeing that people were doing vlog type content, and their camera is like under their chin, and we're looking at the ceiling behind them.
Interesting. Okay.
Not a very flattering shot either. Why don't we take a look and show some example?
So I guess, in some cases, and I've seen this a lot with our customers in general, if they're doing any sort of filming or even teleconferencing, right? If they're using built-in webcams built into a laptop, and I suspect a lot of people do that for vlog content, the angle of the screen with a built-in webcam often means that it's looking straight up your nose. It's not an ideal look.
It's Blair Witch.
Yeah, it's not really what you're looking for in many cases. And of course, there's a lot of ways of tackling that. We've talked about it in relation to our Webcaster X2. Get away from the phone, use a real camera for streaming. I think the same is true for getting away from the built-in laptop webcams, right? Because they don't give you the flexibility to have the right angles you ideally want.
No, and webcams don't have tripod mounts, right? They're
Right.
not great for positioning. It's kind of set it and forget it once,
Right.
right? Whereas when you get, to the next level of camera where you have a tripod mount, it's a lot easier to get that position correctly. And one of the things that we see in so many live streams is, someone who has their camera somewhere like this, okay? Now, you see some of the ceiling, you're looking at the bottom of your chin, so a lot of the times lights tend to be, higher up in the room, right? And when you look at the bottom of the chin, it's actually it really reveals that ugly chin shadow, okay?
Thanks. I really appreciate that, Dan.
It's hard. You know what, George? Your beard is amazing, and it helps to conceal the chin shadow. And also, we have great lighting in this studio, so that helps. But still, the frame and the angle, it's not the most flattering shot.
Yeah,
right?
it's for sure. And again, like I mentioned, if it's the up the nose kind of a shot, that's just not. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
That's not ideal.
It's also really hard to see the table. So in terms of anchoring you in this frame using the rule of thirds, George, we can't do that anymore.
Right.
We're now using the ceiling as our potential rule of thirds.
Which is an ugly anchor to use. I mean, generally, most ceilings are pretty bad.
Yeah, or just plain and boring, right?
Right.
So the tip is, instead of this low shot, let's get the camera higher. Let's go up like this, okay? I'm even going to put it a little too high, okay?
Because I've seen that too, actually. I've seen some examples that I would call too high, where it's almost,
Yeah, I mean,
way up here.
You don't want to be like looking up, right?
Right.
But you do want to be, I would say, at about eye level or forehead level.
Okay.
So above the chin.
Well, that feels
and
a lot
looking
more
down
natural
slightly.
for me to look into the camera too this way. I'm not looking down. I'm not tilting my head way back to look up. It's just a natural position for me to sit there and look into the camera.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also more flattering because the way it projects your face, it actually is going to make you look a little more slender, a little more, the lighting, the shadow off your nose.
Right.
It's just typically it's going to look a little bit better. And this is the same rule applies. So I'm up close, but the same rule applies if we're back here as well. Okay, so if I get too low back here, I mean, let's compare the A camera and the B camera actually. So, here's our standard desk shot. But you see how low it is that I can't even see the top of the desk, okay? Now let's take a look at our A camera again and just compare.
Yeah.
Okay? So A camera up a little higher than George's chin. B camera, we'll go back to that. B camera low. Doesn't look as good, does it?
No, there's some awkward shadows in there for sure. It's
Yeah.
Plus, it does feel awkward. I mean, that distance, it doesn't feel bad to look down towards the camera for me. But when I look at it on screen, I feel like I'm on a perch staring down at my audience, looking down on them almost, as opposed to trying to have a natural conversation.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll just get the camera a bit higher, and wow, that's so much better. So
Perfect.
I'll come back over here, join you again.
All right.
Just going to put this back on the tripod.
So that's an interesting one in terms of, but I guess, yeah, there's always limits to that as well in terms of how high or how low or somewhere in there. I guess it comes to experimentation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, experiment a little bit. The general rule I'd say is just get the lens at least as high as the eye or maybe up to the forehead, and just, you don't want to be like looking completely down, but you do want to be a little bit higher than your subject's eye.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay, so we've gone through, how many is that? 6 tips?
That's 6 tips.
We
One more.
promised 7, so let's do our final tip, and that tip is depth. And depth is the distance between the camera and what you see at the very back. So
Okay. And we've played with this a little bit when we've been playing with the chroma keying in here. That depth has made a big difference in the quality of chroma keying.
absolutely. So huge tip, anytime you want to make a shot look better, add more depth.
Okay.
And we're going to show you why. Generally speaking, what you want to do is you typically want to get your subject further as far as possible from whatever's behind them. And the camera can still see what's going on back there. And when you have the focal length and you zoom in, it definitely, you can still see everything behind, but you don't want to have your subject right against the back of a wall or up against whatever's behind them.
I shouldn't be all the way back here.
Yeah, no.
Up against the wall.
Well, I'll show you why, actually.
I mean, aside from the shadows.
Why don't you stay right there, George, and
Sure.
I'll bring this camera over.
I mean, right away, you can see the shadows just because of the way the lighting is done. You know, I can't hide that on my backdrop now.
Yeah, exactly. So let's take a look at this. This is a shot with no depth, and what ends up happening is, yes, you get these kind of weird shadows off of your lights, which you don't want. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that you know, it's just not an interesting shot, right? We're telling one story with this shot, and that story is, you know, the flat, you know, we're not able to incorporate the beautiful studio that we have or wherever else we might be. So let's create a shot now instead that has a lot of depth, okay?
Okay.
So why don't you come actually up in front of the desk here. We're going to break some rules here and come right in front of the desk. Okay? So this shot now, I'm getting the camera back further. And you come this way on the desk a bit more. So now we're really taking advantage of all the space that this studio has. So even though it's not limited, it's not much, but we've got the corner, which is the furthest point behind you now, and it creates like some more interesting angles. It helps to separate you from the background, George. It also helps us to you know, separate the light of the background. So if we wanted to change the lighting in the background versus the lighting that we have on your face and create some different moods.
There's space to do that.
Yeah, you now have the ability to do that. And it just gives you many more options of how you can compose your frame. Like if I wanted to come over here, you know, a little bit, you know, we've now got a much different shot, right? We've got, we can see the audio tiles on the wall behind. We can see some lights in the shot. I can move the camera a little this way and, you know, frame it up a little differently. If you're against a wall, you can't do that. All you're seeing is wall. Right. So adding depth to your frame gives you more creative control, and it's going to make your shot look much better.
Cool.
All right, why don't we...
So those are very useful tips. I guess really a lot of the things that we do here in the studio, we combine all of those things together to try to make things as easy as possible, but also consistent and not having to change it all the time. Because we do use this space, not just for this show, but for many other things. And if we had to reset it every time, and we try to have a balance, I guess, between all these different elements.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? Like with all these tips and rules, don't be afraid to break the rules as well, you know? None of these are set in stone. These are just general guidelines, and if you follow these guidelines, you know that you're going to be safe and that you're going to have shots that look good. But rules are made to be broken, and in some cases, you know, you may not have enough depth, and you have to just make it work anyways. So don't be afraid to experiment and see.
So we did get another question here. I'll pass this one over to you and see if that's something that you can address.
Yeah. So this one here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got a question, the look in the room when doing a multi-camera shoot. So that's a good question is when you have many different cameras that are seeing different parts of the room, obviously you want to make sure that the room looks good from all those angles. And we're kind of pulling back the curtain a little bit today, and we're seeing, you know, you're getting to see a little bit of the studio that's all around us, which normally we don't see. But when you have a multi-camera shoot, you want to, I would say, consider why it is a multi-camera shoot. If all you're showing is the same thing but from a different angle, is it really necessary? Maybe it's better to simplify and compose one really nice frame, dress it. Set dressing is so important as well. Is, you know, maybe you move the plant in, maybe you open the window to get a little bit more light. Maybe you reposition that lamp so that it's on the rule of thirds axis. Composing your frame is really going to make a big difference.
Right.
So when you have multi-camera, now you're composing the frame for 2 or 3 cameras. You just want to make sure that all of them look good and that they're consistent.
So this one's a semi off topic, but someone was asking, can you talk about matching different camera brands with a switcher? Normally, they would manually white balance their cameras if forced to use different brands. And how does a switcher deal with this? So I think balancing even mixed brand cameras, doing white balancing between them is relevant to what we're talking about right now in terms of getting nice consistent shots in a multi-camera shoot. In terms of the switcher part, that can be an interesting one because that heavily depends on the switcher. Now here in our studio, we're using our own Pearl 2. Pearl 2 doesn't really care what camera you throw at it. That is not true of all video switchers out there. There are many video switchers out there where all the resolutions and all the signal types have to match identically. So that's separate from dealing with white balancing the cameras, but that can be a problem when you're mixing camera brands because some will be 1080i, some will be 1080p, and many switchers out there have to have the same signals. So that's something to look at with a switcher. In the case of Epiphan equipment, in particular Pearl 2, it doesn't care. So you could throw whatever you want at it and it'll be fine. But maybe you can address the white balancing thing.
Yeah, I mean, you saw today we were switching between 2 cameras. And
they do look quite different.
They do look different, and that's because they are different sensors. The first step to making sure your cameras match, obviously, is to make sure that they are both white balanced at the same setting. So if you have a manual white balance on your camera, use it. My suggestion would be to try to actually dial in the Kelvin temperature. So many cameras allow you to actually choose the Kelvin setting for the color temperature of the light in the room. In this room, we're actually at about 5,500 Kelvin. So we're using daylight balanced bulbs. So we have manually put 5,500 Kelvin into our main camera, which is a C100. And on the XA10 over here, we've also dialed in the exact same color temperature, 5,500 Kelvin. If you don't have that option, what you can do is perhaps, I hate to say it, but dial in one of your cameras and on the second one, use an auto white balance, see what it looks like, see if it matches. Or if you have like a daylight setting on your camera, set both of your cameras to daylight if you're using daylight balanced bulbs. The other thing you can do is many cameras actually, higher end cameras, actually have some contrast settings that you can play with. So you can spend some time experimenting to make sure that your contrast is similar. Or what you can do with many different types of newer cameras is they actually have LUTs, which are lookup tables. So you can actually download a camera file that will help you to match your camera to another camera. So for example, if you have a C100 Mark I and perhaps a C300, you can actually download a lookup table or a LUT for your C300 that matches it to a C100 or vice versa.
Okay, just helps you guide what settings should be used so that they'll be similar.
Exactly. So it can be difficult to get them matched perfectly, but
well, I guess even aperture plays a role depending on the camera and all these other pieces. But
yeah, make sure they're at the same ISO setting. Might be a good idea. But generally, the rule of thumb is just white balance. And if you can, try to play with the contrast settings in your camera so that they're at least somewhat similar. Okay. And the saturation as well.
Perfect. So that covers our tips. We've answered some really good questions. Actually, really appreciate those questions.
Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Couple of notes we wanted to mention is that the Webcaster X2 giveaway, that contest ends today. So if you haven't entered yet, get in there. We'll post a link in descriptions and so on. And the winner will be announced on Friday, I believe.
Yeah, that's tomorrow. So
yeah. So
if you want to win a Webcaster X2,
get the entries in there today.
Get your entries in today.
We have quite a lot of entries the last time I looked. So somebody in that big pool is going to be the lucky winner.
Could be you.
And by the way, Epiphan staff are not included. It is not rigged.
I wish.
Exactly. I would like to take one home. So as always, if you have any suggestions, comments, throw them in there. What do we have next week?
Next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about some experiments that we've done on the road again, taking our webcaster out and doing a live stream out at actually at a music recording session.
Okay, interesting.
So there was a great band that actually gave us permission to come and live stream them in a recording studio, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit.
That sounds really cool. I'll look forward to hearing from them. Of course, like, subscribe, click all those button things on the social things, and follow us. We're here every Thursday, 3 o'clock Eastern. And I'm George.
And I'm Dan.
We'll see you next week.
So long.